So I got invited to speak here, and I was feeling like, oh man, I'm starting to get famous. This is a forum with George Church and Sandy Penland and Marilyn Menard, and you know, my name is starting to be thrown around in the sort of same echelon as these great luminaries of the community. I'm so excited to just talk about my companies and all the successes that I've had, and then it became clear what the theme of the thing was, and I was like, yeah, I've got some good stories there too. So thank you for the invite. This is a really great event because I think we don't talk about this kind of stuff enough, and it becomes very scary, and it becomes something where people are afraid of being associated with failures, when being associated with failures is almost as important as being associated with successes, because those failures inform what comes next in your life. So I'm going to talk about how my startup failed. When I characterize it that way, you may think I'm bitter about it, but I'm actually not. The reason I'm not bitter about it is because I've had many startups succeed. I sold a semiconductor company for 12x to investors in about 3 years. I now run an incubator. We just had our first IPO earlier this year. We're expanding to 30 concurrent companies, and we're all very excited about all of them. I'm on 3 boards of 3 of our companies and a founder on 5 of them. But I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about what happened on my personal timeline here, which is that I started this company and sold it, and that was great. And then there's a secret little niche right here where I spent about 3 months working on an idea that did not work out. And it did not work out because I made some fundamental mistakes in how I approached it, how I set it up from the very beginning. And I'm going to tell you about that. All right, why do startups fail? What are the most common reasons? Number one, there is no market need. So 42% of all startups that fail because there's no market need. Who can guess another one? Team, that is a good one. What else? Money, yes, you've named the top 3 reasons. All right, the number 2 reason, 29% of all startups that fail are at least in part because they just run out of money. People don't care enough about their idea, whether it's investors, whether it's the customers. They run out of money before they actually achieve critical mass. And yes, the third most common reason why startups fail is that they assemble the wrong team. I made this slide, and then I realized that actually this is an awesome team. In fact, you might call them an A team. But I didn't want to give up on the idea, so this is kind of, you know, it's like you think you're assembling the A team, but it's kind of off-brand. And doesn't really work the way that you were hoping it might. So this is actually the hardest one to get right, and spoiler alert, this is exactly how my startup went wrong. Before I talk about the specifics of my abject failure, it's probably useful to frame the story. So the idea behind the startup was I had just gotten off of a very successful series of engagements with DARPA, and they were very excited to fund the next thing that I wanted to work on. And I had a background right out of school of working as a hacker, an ethical hacker. Basically what happened was I served out my earnout in my previous startup, and I pitched to them an idea for how to determine when somebody who is not actually owner of a device picks up that device and starts using it. Because as people were, at the time, starting to hook up more and more of their actual sensitive accounts, including their DoD asset accessing accounts, it becomes vital to be able to actually, in real time, assess whether the person who's interacting with something continues to be the person who actually owns that device and actually has authorization to use it. So DARPA gave us money, which is great. If we go back to those 3 reasons why startups are likely to fail, we look at whether or not there was a market need. We actually had a bunch of customers lined up, and in fact, there's a company today that I advised very early in their history called BioCash that is doing almost the exact same thing as the startup that I started that failed, and is getting a lot of traction, not just with the defense industry, but also with banking institutions, and they currently are monitoring more than 6 billion transactions a day for potential signs of fraud. So this is a good validation that there actually is a market here and a good a good validation of the fundamental premise of this business. So it wasn't that very most common mode of failure. Did we run out of money? No, because DARPA was very gracious, and my goodness, that came out huge. Almost as huge as the check they wrote us. No, it wasn't that big a check. But they did give us enough of a check that we were able to get off the ground and actually build a working prototype and pilot it with several customers. And what was even better about it was that that was non-dilutive funding. If anybody is considering startup life, that is better than gold because that means that you get money and you don't have to give them anything really, including equity. So that was great. And so that was phenomenal. So we had a lot of runway, and we had sort of a lead customer. So somebody who could tell us whether we were on the right track with something, or and be a very sort of demanding voice in the room when it came to is what we're building actually useful or not. The team. This is actually where it went wrong. So when you're thinking about putting together a startup team, there are many things that are absolutely vital to making it successful. Do you have complementary skills? Is everybody actually bringing something to the table where they can contribute fully? Do people work together effectively? And are people fully committed? Especially in the early stages of a startup, you're talking about somebody who you're going to spend 80, 90 hours a week with. This is somebody who is going to be in your very, very inner circle of trust, somebody you're probably going to spend more time with than your spouse, at least for a time. And somebody that you need to make sure that you have an absolutely fantastic working relationship with, and somebody who's going to be as invested as you are in making that thing successful, even if, for example, a server literally catches on fire because a uninterruptible power source decides to explode and set off the sprinklers. Just a random example, I don't know why that would ever happen. You need that person to be in their car, driving out to the data center, taking it out, re-racking it on a different floor, and be sort of be on deck at 3 a.m. to go and make sure that everything comes together. So there are many sort of vital elements in picking a co-founding team and assembling a co-founding team, and the source of my failure here was that I picked the wrong co-founder. Wasn't actually Tom Hanks. I'm sure he would have been great. So the reason why I'm putting a picture of Tom Hanks up here is because my co-founder is actually a really awesome guy. Do we agree that Tom Hanks is a really awesome guy? Does anyone have anything against Tom Hanks? Oh, okay. All right, just an extra vote of confidence for Tom Hanks. So it's because my co-founder was actually a really awesome guy. He was somebody who I actually knew from very early in my career, who I had worked with before, not very closely, but I knew that he was. I knew that he was a good guy. I knew that he had a wonderful family, and I knew that everybody he worked with spoke very highly of him. I knew that he had a great depth of operational experience. So he actually ran a sort of a global organization of network operating centers that managed over 600 employees on 24/7 shifts and operating center around the globe. Great operational experience, and also a fantastic Rolodex of people who he'd interacted with in his previous roles at various customers who had been looking to him as sort of their subject matter expert for identifying security breaches, and had sort of come to see him as somebody who they could invest in responsibly and feel as though he was going to deliver on whatever representations that he made. So this was all great, and yeah, as I said, we had worked together before, and we had got along pretty well. So I recruited him to come join me as my co-founder, and gave him a lot of equity, and said, all right, it's time to get serious here. DARPA contract starts on September 1st. It's time to quit your job and move out to Boston, like we agreed. And he said, I'll quit my job. But notice what's missing. He didn't want to actually move. When the time came, he wasn't all in. Has anybody here heard of Dunbar's number? This is Yes? No? I'm getting a giggle, but not a, okay. So, so this is essentially a recognition and a characterization of the fact that throughout history, as anthropologists have been, have had enough data in order to actually, make observations, the number of people who are in various classes of intimacy with any individual has actually stayed relatively steady. So even today with Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and whatever kids are using these days, people have about 150 acquaintances, which is the one that people pull out the most. This is people who you have some level of interaction with, maybe on the order of like once every month or once every 2 months. So this is probably like a couple of your high school friends, a bunch of your friends from college, and whatever. But it actually scales down, and you have about 5 really intimate friends. These are people who if you have an emergency, you're sleeping on their couch. And you probably are in their wedding, and probably one of you is godparenting the other's kid. And part of the reason why this actually tends to be relatively fixed proportions across human history is that humans have a certain bandwidth of communication and a certain bandwidth of processing, and when it comes, and they also have a certain amount of time, and when it comes time to actually form relationships and maintain relationships, you can only squeeze in so much. So if you're investing X amount in one relationship, you just don't have that much to invest in 150 other random people. I bring this up because when you are choosing a co-founder, you are essentially choosing at least one of your 5. If you're choosing multiple co-founders, you're probably choosing at least a couple of your 5s. This is somebody who you're going to live with, eat with, breathe with, which is kind of gross, hopefully not sleep with. Yeah, don't do that. But this is somebody who you are going to, as I said, you're probably going to spend more time with this person than your spouse. And it is very, very important that you understand that commitment when you are saying, I'm going to spend my next 5, 10 years of my life working on this thing with you, my partner. Are we in it together? Let's go. You need to be best friends. So you need those little necklaces, and that should actually probably be part of the founding documents that you sign at the beginning. Should be you take a little heart and you break it into 5 pieces if you have 5 co-founders, and that's what you do. All right, it's hard to do that from across the country. I resisted the temptation of, since I brought up Tom Hanks, I resisted the temptation of putting Sleepless in Seattle poster up here, but then I told you about it anyway, so I don't know if that really counts as resisting temptation. So we were on opposite coasts, and we genuinely tried to make it work for a while. So we set up a remote teleconference that we left on all the time. 8 to 10 hours a day. He flew out 1 week a month, and we genuinely tried to make it work, but it just, the bandwidth of communication, despite our best efforts, just wasn't high enough. Our priorities got misaligned. We started diverging in the vision that we had for the company, and fundamentally, it became clear that what we were each trying to build was not the same thing, so we weren't building the same thing together. At some point, you got to rip off the Band-Aid. The best thing about this particular fail is that essentially exactly as soon as we identified it wasn't working, we both agreed that it wasn't working, and we walked away clean. So if I could leave you with one thing that went really, really well about this failure, it was that if you have decided that something has failed, don't stick with it. Move on. Figure out what you're going to do next, and sort of move on with your life. Because the only thing that you don't, if you're a gambler and you're placing chips on the table, you can always find more chips, but you can't actually find more time. You are, until the singularity happens, you're a person, you don't get the time back. Another couple good things. We had money, so that was great. We actually just sort of split it up, and we're both happy. The other really nice thing was that because our only funding source was customers and DARPA, we didn't have any outside investors, so we didn't have any outside stakeholders who we really had to make sure that we were treating responsibly. So that was actually a really nice thing and something that I hadn't been consciously planning for at the time, but I actually now, when I'm starting a new company, think about if this goes sour, who are going to be the stakeholders left holding the bag, and how badly is it going to hurt them? Like how, if this does have to unwind, how is that going to happen, and how are we going to be responsible to the people who are placing their confidence in us? I also had maintained actual control over the company. So sometimes people start companies and they're just like, oh, there's 4 of us, we'll each get 25% of the equity and, whatever. That's, God bless you if you can make that work. That has never worked for me. Having a clear final decision maker is absolutely key, just so that things don't turn into long, drawn-out fights. As long as that person is trustworthy and fiduciary, take their fiduciary responsibility seriously, it's really great to just sort of centralize final decision making. And obviously, the thing that I took away the most from this is to really test the commitment of somebody before you invest a lot of yourself in them. So now I really like to see people who have potentially even done startups together before, potentially have worked together for 3 years before they actually, in some other setting, before they actually go off to start a company. Potentially people who have been roommates and have done great things together. People who are committed to each other, and people who have really sort of been through the crap with each other is really a great recipe for having a strong founding team. And I'm going to say there are plenty of fish in the sea. You're going to think that I'm talking about my co-founder, but I'm actually talking about ideas. There are actually plenty of ideas. There are plenty of potential companies out there. Anybody who's in this room, anybody who's at MIT, period, and also anybody especially who's thinking actively about not just the best case scenario, but also what can happen along the way, is somebody who's going to recognize that they are a continual fount of ideas. This is not going to be, if you have something that you're excited about and it doesn't work out for some reason, something else is going to excite you tomorrow. So don't be afraid of this being your only thing that you have to offer the world. There are plenty of idea fish in the sea. And don't found companies with Tom Hanks. That's it.